The morning sun hit the granite countertop, warming the stone Robert had installed years ago. I traced the veins, sipping coffee and enjoying the silence. Then my phone buzzed. I smiled, expecting a photo of my grandchildren, but the screen displayed a message from David. "True story," my son wrote. "Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I have my own life and family." I nodded and rewrote my will. The next morning, he burst into my house and shattered my peace. I stared at the digital letters until they blurred. There was no context, no preceding argument about nursing homes. We had just eaten Sunday dinner together the night before. I had roasted a chicken, he had complained about the traffic. Now this. The brutality wasn't the refusal of care. I didn't need his care, but the dismissal of my existence. I sat there for an hour, the coffee turning cold, while the house settled. I didn't cry. Tears imply surprise, and deep down, I realized I wasn't actually surprised. For years, I had been the safety net. The emergency loans for roof repairs, the cash for Jessica's car, the medical bills insurance supposedly denied. I had been buying their affection in installments of $5,000, hoping it would mature into love. David's text was a receipt for a transaction that had failed. My hands didn't tremble as I set the mug down. They were steady. I wasn't a victim here. I was a woman who had finally been given permission to stop paying for her own exploitation. I picked up the phone again. My thumb hovered over the keypad. A younger version of me would have begged. I would have typed paragraphs asking what I did wrong, pleading for a chance to explain. But that woman died with Robert. I straightened my spine, feeling the steel in my vertebrae. I typed 4 letters. Okay. I didn't add a period. I didn't add an emoji. I just hit send. The swoosh sound of the message delivering felt like a guillotine blade dropping on my past life. The silence returned, but now it felt charged. Like the air before a thunderstorm. I didn't wait for David to reply. He was probably expecting a frantic phone call, expecting me to chase him. Instead, I walked to the study and opened the heavy oak filing cabinet. I pulled out the beige folder labeled Estate Planning. The paper was cool under my fingertips. I found the business card for Thomas Chen. I hadn't called him since probate closed 5 years ago. It was time to reopen everything. I dialed the number. The receptionist answered on the second ring, her voice professional and crisp. "Chen and Associates." "This is Rosa," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I need to speak with Mr. Chen immediately. It regards a significant revision to my will." "Is everything all right, Mrs. Morrison?" she asked, a note of concern breaking her script. "Everything is perfectly clear," I replied. I hung up and looked out the window. David had his own life. Now, I would finally reclaim mine. Mr. Chen's office smelled of mahogany and old paper, a scent that reminded me of Robert's funeral. I sat in the leather chair, my back straight, while Thomas reviewed the draft. He peered over his spectacles, his expression grave. "This is a significant step, Rosa. Removing a child as a beneficiary is irrevocable in practice, if not in law. Are you certain?" I didn't hesitate. He made his position clear, Thomas. "I am simply aligning my estate with his reality." We spent the next hour outlining the Margaret Morrison Living Trust. The house, the stocks, the modest pension. Everything would bypass David completely. Instead, we listed the local children's hospital, the animal shelter, a scholarship fund for students like Robert, and locked education trusts for the grandchildren. Writing those names felt like cleaning a deep wound. It stung. It was the good kind of pain. It was the feeling of necrotic tissue being cut away to let healthy skin grow. Back home, the silence felt different. It wasn't lonely. It was focused. I pulled out the boxes of financial records I kept in the hallway closet. I needed to know the truth. Not the emotional truth of a mother who excuses her son, but the mathematical truth. I spread the bank statements over the dining room table. I highlighted every transfer to David or Jessica in yellow. The color brightened the page like a warning sign. I started calculating the sums. I found the transfer from 6 months ago. $15,000. David had called, his voice tight with panic. Claiming Jessica's mother needed urgent cancer treatments insurance wouldn't cover. I had wired the money immediately. But looking at the date now, I remembered something else. 2 weeks later, Jessica had posted photos of a new kitchen renovation on social media. At the time, I assumed they saved up. Now, the coincidence tasted like ash in my mouth. It was a lie. I kept digging. $5,000 for a car repair. That surely shouldn't cost that much. $3,000 for emergency dental work. $7,000 for a vacation they called a mental health necessity. I tapped the calculator buttons. The numbers climbing higher. When I hit the total, I stared at the display. $47,000 in 4 years. I hadn't been helping a struggling young family. I had been funding a lifestyle I couldn't even afford for myself. I felt sick. The nausea wasn't from the money lost. It was from the realization of what I was to them. I wasn't mom. I wasn't grandma. I was an ATM with a pulse. Every Sunday dinner, every hug from my grandchildren, it had all been a transaction fee. They tolerated my presence to ensure access to my capital. I looked at the photo of David on the mantel, his graduation smile frozen in time. That boy was gone. He was a complete stranger. I went to close the binder, satisfied I had stopped the bleeding. Then my eyes caught a recurring transfer fee on an old statement. My stomach dropped. The joint account. We opened it years ago for emergencies when Robert got sick, and I never removed David's name. It was still active. If he checked it online, he could see everything. He could see the payment to Mr. Chen. I grabbed my keys, knowing I was already too late. The morning air was crisp. Smelling of damp soil and cedar mulch. I knelt by the prize hybrid teas Robert had planted, my pruning shears slicing through dead wood with a satisfying snap. It was the only violence I allowed in my life. Then tires screeched on the asphalt. The sound tore through the quiet neighborhood like a scream. I didn't even have time to stand before a car door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps pounded up the driveway, trampling the grass. David burst through the garden gate, the latch rattling against the wood. His face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, veins bulging in his neck. He looked less like my son and more like a stranger looking for a fight. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his voice cracking. Birds scattered from the feeder, startled by the noise. I stood slowly, keeping the sharp pruning shears in my right hand. I didn't retreat, I just watched him unravel. "Lower your voice," I said, my tone flat. "The neighbors have ears." He didn't lower anything. He stepped closer, looming over me, invading my personal space. "I went to transfer funds for the mortgage and the account is gone. Closed. And I saw the check to that lawyer. You're moving everything." He was shaking, vibrating with a rage that seemed disproportionate to a simple banking change. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. The realization hit me cold and hard. I brushed a stray leaf from my apron. "It is my money, David. I am simply managing it." He scoffed, a wet, ugly sound. "It's Dad's money. It's supposed to be for the family. You can't just burn it on legal fees because you're having a tantrum." I met his eyes. "You sent me a text. You said you have your own life. I am respecting that." The gaslighting began immediately. "I was stressed. You know I didn't mean it." "Words have meaning," I replied. "And actions have consequences." He wiped sweat from his upper lip, his eyes darting around the garden as if looking for something to break. "You're being paranoid." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. This is senile behavior." The insult landed softly, lacking the weight he intended. I gripped the shears tighter. "I am perfectly lucid. I am just no longer willing to be your retirement plan." He took a step back, shocked by my resistance. Then the anger cracked, revealing the rot underneath. You don't understand, he hissed, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. We need that liquidity. We have payments due on the house, the boat. We were counting on the monthly transfer. He stopped, realizing he had said too much. He had admitted that my death, or at least my financial compliance, was part of his budget. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about his own solvency. I pointed the shears toward the gate. The steel glinted in the morning sun. Get out, I said. Get off my property, David. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. You're making a mistake? He muttered, but the bravado was gone, replaced by a frantic, hunted look. He turned and marched back to his car. As he drove away, I knew this wasn't over. This was just the opening shot of a war. 2 days later, a delivery van idled in my driveway. I watched through the blinds, heart hammering, expecting a process server. Instead, a uniformed man delivered a vase of 24 red roses. They were lush, velvet-petaled, and obscenely expensive. The card read, Mom, I'm sorry. Work stress is killing me. Let's start over. Love, David. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. It was a peace offering, or perhaps a bribe. I placed the heavy vase on the counter, feeling nothing but cold suspicion. The offensive continued the next morning with a letter slid under my door. This one was on thick, cream-colored stationery, smelling faintly of Jessica's perfume. "We miss you," it began, invoking the grandchildren in the second sentence. She wrote about forgiveness being the cornerstone of family, weaponizing my own values against me. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. For a moment, standing in my hallway, I wavered. The silence of the house suddenly felt oppressive. Was I being too rigid? Was I the villain? I needed a reality check, so I called Linda. She had known me since college and had zero patience for nonsense. I read her the letter, my voice trembling slightly. "Honey," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "They aren't apologizing for the text message. They are apologizing for your reaction to it. There is a difference." The fog in my head cleared instantly. Linda was right. They weren't sorry they hurt me. They were sorry the bank of Mom was closed. Staying in the house felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. I needed distance to fortify my resolve. I threw a few sweaters and a book into an overnight bag and locked the back door. I didn't tell David where I was going. I just got in my sedan and drove 2 hours west to Linda's beach shack. As the city skyline faded in the rearview mirror, the knot in my chest began to loosen. I wasn't running away. I was taking a strategic retreat. The coast was gray and windy, the ocean churning with whitecaps. I spent 3 days walking the shoreline, letting the salt spray sting my face. I remembered the woman I was before I was David's mother. I was Rosa, who had nursed Robert through 3 years of illness. I was Rosa, who navigated grief without crumbling. I realized that solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a luxury. I didn't need their chaotic noise to feel alive. I found my center in the roar of the waves. I returned home on Wednesday evening, feeling armor-plated. The house was exactly as I left it, silent and safe. There were 5 missed calls on my landline, escalating from concern to annoyed. I deleted them without listening. I wasn't afraid of their anger anymore, because I finally understood its source. It wasn't about love or abandonment. It was about control. And for the first time in decades, the control was entirely in my hands. I made tea and prepared to deal with the debris. The roses on the counter had begun to wilt, dropping dark red petals like drops of blood. I didn't throw them out. I drove them to the nursing home down the street, where the residents would appreciate the color without knowing the cost. As for Jessica's perfumed letter, I didn't burn it. I punched 3 holes in the side and filed it in the beige folder marked documentation. It wasn't a keepsake. It was evidence for the battle I knew was still coming. Sunday afternoon silence was broken by the crunch of gravel. I peered through the sheer curtains to see a silver SUV, parking behind my sedan. My heart did a traitorous flip when the back doors opened. Charlie jumped out first, clutching a plastic dinosaur, followed by Mia in a pink dress. They looked innocent, like peace offerings wrapped in soft cotton. But behind them, David and Jessica emerged, wearing matching expressions of strained optimism. They were using my grandchildren as human shields. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Charlie launched himself at my legs, burying his face in my apron. "Grandma, we brought cookies." The smell of his shampoo, green apple and childhood, almost broke me. I hugged Mia, smoothing her hair. But my eyes remained locked on David. We were in the neighborhood. He lied smoothly, stepping over the threshold without an invitation. "We thought the kids should see you." It was a strategic raid disguised as a reunion. We sat in the living room, the tension thick enough to choke on. Jessica unpacked a plastic container of oatmeal raisin cookies, my favorite, placing them on the coffee table like a bribe. "We just want things to go back to normal, Rosa," she said, her voice sugary. David nodded, watching me closely. "Family is the most important thing, Mom. We shouldn't let money divide us." They spoke as if the missing $47,000 was a misunderstanding, not a theft. I didn't reach for a cookie. I folded my hands in my lap, refusing to play along. "I agree family is important," I said. "Which is why honesty matters." Jessica's smile faltered. She glanced at the children, who were coloring on the rug. "Charlie, Mia," she said sharply. "Go play in Grandma's backyard. Look for ladybugs." The children scampered out, oblivious to the temperature drop in the room. As the sliding glass door clicked shut, the warmth vanished from Jessica's face. "Let's cut the act," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a flat, hard register. "You are being selfish, Rosa. You are sitting on a fortune while your family suffers." David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes cold. "Here is the deal. You dissolve that trust and reinstate the monthly transfers by Friday. If you don't, we will assume you don't want to be part of this family." The threat hung in the air. It wasn't subtle. It was a ransom demand. "Or what?" I asked, my voice steady despite the nausea rising in my throat. "Or you never see them again," Jessica replied. "We'll move. We'll tell them you chose your bank account over them." I looked at her designer handbag and the keys to their luxury SUV on the table. "You talk about suffering," I said. "But you drive a Mercedes and the children are in private school. You aren't struggling to survive. You are struggling to maintain a facade." David's face turned purple. "That is none of your business?" he shouted. I stood up, feeling 10 feet tall. "My money is my business. And my love for those children is not a bargaining chip." I pointed to the door. "Get out. Take your cookies and leave." They scrambled to gather their things, shocked by my refusal to fold. As they dragged the confused children to the car, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a lawsuit. The summons arrived via a process server, who refused to meet my eyes. I stood in my kitchen, the legal document trembling in my hand, reading the accusation over and over. David had filed for emergency guardianship, alleging rapid cognitive decline and paranoid delusions. He claimed I was a danger to myself and my estate. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a calculated assassination of my character. He wanted to strip me of my rights to save his lifestyle. I called Mr. Chen, my voice frighteningly calm. "He actually did it," I said. "He declared war." The evaluation took place in Dr. Hernandez's office, a room painted a calming, deceptive blue. For 3 hours, I became a specimen under a microscope. I counted backwards from 100 by sevens. I remembered lists of random words like apple, penny, and table. I interpreted proverbs and drew complex geometric shapes from memory. It was humiliating to prove I knew what year it was, but I performed with surgical precision. I wouldn't give David a single crumb of evidence to use against me. I was fighting for my life. When the testing ended, Dr. Hernandez set down her clipboard and removed her glasses. She looked at me not as a patient, but as a peer. Mrs. Morrison, she said, her voice low. Your cognitive function is in the 95th percentile for your age. You aren't declining. You are exceptionally sharp. She leaned forward, lowering her voice further. I see this often. Adult children using the legal system to enforce financial compliance. It is abuse, plain and simple. Her words were the armor I needed. I wasn't crazy. I was just solvent. The hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in November. The courthouse smelled of wet wool and floor wax, a scent of institutional misery. David sat at the plaintiff's table with a lawyer whose suit cost more than my first car. They didn't look at me. David stared at the table, his jaw working, looking like a petulant child denied a toy. I sat beside Mr. Chen, wearing my best navy suit. I felt like a statue carved from ice. I wouldn't react. I wouldn't cry. I would let the truth scream for me. David's lawyer opened with a theatrical speech about protection and vulnerability. He painted a picture of a confused, grieving widow making erratic decisions. He cited the closed bank accounts and the garden confrontation as proof of my instability. She waved pruning shears at her own son, he declared, twisting my defense into aggression. She believes her family is plotting against her. This paranoia is a classic symptom of dementia. It was a compelling story. If you ignored the reality, I dug my fingernails into my palms to keep from shouting. Then Dr. Hernandez took the stand. She was clinical, precise, and utterly devastating to their case. She walked the court through my test scores, explaining that my logic was sound and my memory was pristine. Mrs. Morrison is not suffering from paranoia, she stated, looking directly at David. She is reacting rationally to documented financial pressure. Her decisions are not symptoms of disease, they are strategies of self-preservation. The air left the room. David's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. Science had just dismantled their fiction. The judge, a woman with gray hair and eyes like flint, leaned over the bench. She had been silent, reading the file, but now she focused entirely on David. Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. I have a question regarding the exhibit labeled Text Message A. She held up a printout of the screenshot I had saved. Please take the stand. David stood up slowly, his confidence evaporating. He walked to the witness box like a man walking to the gallows. He knew what was coming. Read this aloud for the court, the judge ordered, handing him the paper. David hesitated, his face turning a blotchy red. Your Honor, I was stressed, he began. Read it, she commanded, cutting him off. David looked down at the paper, his voice barely a whisper. Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I have my own life and family. The words hung in the air. Ugly and undeniable. The courtroom was silent. Even his expensive lawyer looked down at his shoes, unable to defend the indefensible. The judge stared at him for a long moment before turning back to me. It seems to me, Mrs. Morrison, that you are simply following your son's instructions. She banged her gavel, the sound sharp and final. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. The court finds Rosa Morrison fully competent to manage her own estate and affairs. Any further filings of this nature will be considered harassment. The relief hit me like a physical blow. I let out a breath I had been holding for months. I was free. We met in the hallway outside the courtroom. David looked smaller now, stripped of his pretenses. He stepped into my path, his eyes wet with angry tears. You think you won, he hissed, leaning close so no one else could hear. You're going to die alone in that big house. And when you do, I won't be there. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he couldn't hurt me anymore. I know, David, I said softly. You promised me that in a text message. I walked away. Winning in court felt like surviving a car crash. I walked away, but the ache remained. I couldn't shake the terror I had seen in David's eyes. It wasn't just greed. It was panic. I needed to understand the mechanics of his fear, so I hired Mr. Vance, a forensic accountant. We met in my dining room, the table covered in the wreckage of my son's financial life. Vance didn't sugarcoat anything. He opened a black binder and pushed it across the mahogany. "You better sit down, Mrs. Morrison." I opened the file to a spreadsheet of horrors. For years, David and Jessica had been burning cash they didn't have. I saw charges for a luxury lease on the Mercedes, tuition for a private school that cost more than my mortgage, and vacations to Cabo and Aspen. They hadn't been struggling to buy groceries or pay medical bills. They had been struggling to maintain an illusion of wealth. They were drowning in champagne, not water. Every page was a testament to their vanity and my own blindness. "That is just the surface damage," Vance said, tapping a section tabbed in red. "Hair is the structural rot." I flipped the page and stopped breathing. David had taken out high interest loans from predatory lenders. These weren't standard bank loans. They were advances against a future inheritance. He had literally pawned my death. The contracts were gruesome. Compounding interest at rates that would swallow him whole if I didn't die soon. He hadn't just been waiting for me to pass. He had bet his entire life on it. The puzzle pieces clicked into a grotesque picture. The text message, the lawsuit, the threats. It was all a frantic attempt to cover these loans. If he could get guardianship, he could access my assets to pay off the sharks. By proving my sanity, I had inadvertently signed his financial death warrant. I looked up at Vance, feeling a cold numbness spread through my limbs. "He is insolvent," I whispered. Vance nodded grimly. "Technically, he has been bankrupt for 2 years. He just hasn't admitted it yet." A week later, the inevitable letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to me, but to David. Sent to my house, because he still listed it as his mailing address. It was a notice of default on their primary mortgage. They were 90 days behind. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. I held the envelope, feeling the weight of their ruin. They were going to lose the house, the car, the status, everything they had built on the foundation of my expected grave. The collapse was happening right now. My checkbook lay on the counter. It would be so easy to fix this. I could write a check, pay off the arrears, and save them from humiliation. I thought of Charlie and Maya losing their bedrooms. The maternal instinct screamed at me to intervene, to be the savior one last time, but then I looked at the binder Vance had left. If I paid this, I wasn't saving them. I was teaching them that abuse works. I was teaching them that I was still just a resource. I put the checkbook away and pulled out my stationery. I wrote a letter, but not the one they wanted. "David," I wrote, "I know about the loans. I know about the gambling you did with my life expectancy." My handwriting was steady, lacking the tremors of guilt. I didn't offer a cent. Instead, I enclosed a list of bankruptcy attorneys and debt consolidation services. It was the cruelest, kindest thing I had ever done. I was giving them tools to survive reality, not escape it. I had the package delivered by courier to ensure it was received. I didn't wait by the phone for a reaction. There would be no screaming match this time, no bargaining. They knew I knew. The leverage had shifted permanently. They were no longer the aggrieved children waiting for their due. They were exposed frauds. I spent the evening in my garden, pruning the hydrangeas. The dead blooms had to go to make room for new growth. It is a simple, brutal law of nature. 3 weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared on their lawn. I didn't drive by to see it, but Linda told me. She said there were no luxury movers, just a rented U-Haul and a lot of shouting. Jessica's parents had apparently refused to take them in, forcing them into a small apartment on the east side. The Mercedes was repossessed in the driveway, a public spectacle. It was a total collapse of their carefully curated image. The facade had finally crumbled under the weight of the truth. I sat on my porch, drinking tea, feeling a profound sense of loss mixed with peace. I had saved my estate, but I had lost the illusion of my family. It was a high price. Yet I paid it willingly. I couldn't save David from the consequences of his greed without destroying myself. He had chosen his path when he sent that text. I was just letting him walk it. I took a sip of tea, watching the sunset, finally alone and unafraid. Spring hit Portland with an explosion of pink cherry blossoms. Effectively burying the gray memories of the trial, I laced up my running shoes, the rubber soles gripping the pavement as I started my morning 3-mile jog. 6 months ago, I was breathless with anxiety. Now, my lungs expanded with clean, crisp air. My doctor had marveled at my blood pressure last week, asking for my secret. I told him I had simply lost 200 pounds of dead weight. I wasn't talking about body fat. I was talking about the burden of expectation. I finished my run at the Children's Hospital, flashing my new volunteer badge at the security desk. This was my Tuesday ritual now. Reading to children in the oncology ward filled the silence David left behind, but with gratitude instead of entitlement. I saw the brass plaque on the wall listing the Margaret Morrison Trust as a donor for the new play therapy room. It wasn't a tombstone for my money anymore. It was a living, breathing investment. I was building a legacy that couldn't be wasted on a lease for a Mercedes. News of David reached me through the grapevine of neighborhood gossip. Unwanted but inevitable. He was working at an electronics store, wearing a blue polo shirt and selling warranties to strangers. Jessica had taken a retail job at the mall. They lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the freeway. A far cry from the country club lifestyle. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I once expected. I just felt a quiet, distant pity. They were finally learning the hard lesson. I should have taught them 20 years ago. Saturday brought the only noise I welcomed into my home. Charlie and Mia arrived for their court-ordered visitation, accompanied by a polite social worker named Sarah. David wasn't allowed to drop them off, due to the current volatility of his recent behavior. The children looked different, less polished, wearing scuffed sneakers. But happier somehow. They didn't have to perform for expensive toys anymore. We baked oatmeal cookies in the kitchen Robert built. For the first time, the flour on the counter didn't feel like a mess. It felt like a memory being made. While the social worker checked her phone, I pulled Charlie and Mia close to me. I couldn't save their parents from their own choices, but I had made sure the trust included a bulletproof education fund for them. You two are my priority, I whispered, brushing a smudge of flour off Mia's nose. No matter what happens out there, you have a future here. They didn't understand the financial complexities, but they understood the tone. They hugged me tight, smelling of vanilla and trust. I was no longer a bank, I was a sanctuary. That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sun dip below the fence line. My phone sat on the table, silent and black. I thought about that text message one last time. Don't expect me to take care of you. It had been meant as a weapon, a cruel declaration of independence. Instead, it had been a key. He had unlocked my cage and forced me to fly. I took a sip of wine, smiling at the twilight. I didn't need him to take care of me. I was doing just fine on my own.